Hello, folks everywhere, and welcome to the iconic Spaceships panel. From the TARDIS to the X-Wing, Mass Effect's Normandy to the Royal Manticoran Navy, sci-fi is replete with eye-catching spaceships. So what do the panelists think makes a great design from the bridge to engineering and beyond? And is an iconic design really necessary for a great story? And how do you make a spaceship feel like home? Let's start with the introductions. Ed, this panel is actually your own brainchild, so introduce yourself first.
Well, hello folks, my name is Edmond Barrett. I am the writer of the Nameless War series and also my most recent book, the Contact War series. I've also written, because I'm a complete lunatic, a ship guide for the ships out of my own universe. I'm also a keen wargamer and basically great interest in warship development of the late 19th and early 20th century. So yeah, that's my background.
James, over to you.
I'm James Brophy. You'll see me in other panels being a moderator of things. I'm also the designer for all art at Octocon, or at least most of it anyway. Just for people who, if you're looking at the pre-roll for all of the panels, this panel has been in production for so long that we actually put it into the pre-roll. So if you look at the holographic flower, it says Iconic Spaceships is the next panel that every panel is counting down to. And it actually has the full description in it because we wanted to. I wanted to will this panel into existence. I'm a designer for 20 years. I've worked in visual effects and film production, but mostly I'm a huge nerd about spaceship design.
Over to you, Leeann.
Hi, I'm Leeann Hamilton. I am more like a freelance illustrator. I do work for clients like Retronauts and a Nerve Centre in Belfast. I've illustrated stuff like podcast covers. I've done historical comic illustration, and basically I've dipped my toe into animation, video game design, well, more like the visual design of it. I have worked on a good few projects over the years, mostly in comics as well, and my most recent work can be seen in a anthology called Turning Roads. It was funded by Kickstarter, and everyone should check that out. But that's just my relevancy now for the panel here. Yes.
Okay, and last but definitely not least, Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Abnett. I am a writer of stuff. I am a novelist contributing particularly to the Warhammer universe. I've written more comics than is good for me, and I also occasionally contribute to computer game design. And one that will probably be relevant for this panel is that I've wrote the story for the Alien Isolation game, which was basically set aboard a facsimile of the Nostromo. And I have loved spaceships since I don't know when.
And I'll be your moderator. My name is Karina Steffens, and I have absolutely no qualifications to be on this panel, so I'll be asking all the questions. My privilege. And okay, so our first question is, this is a panel about iconic spaceships. So for a spaceship to be iconic, it should probably also stick in our memory. So the first question is, tell us, what was your first spaceship crush? Let's start with James.
My first spaceship crush, it kind of has to be the Enterprise D. It's elegant, it's huge, it's powerful as all hell. It splits into two pieces. It's a Swiss Army knife wrapped in silver that just works really, really beautifully. And when it doesn't, they turn the lights off on the model. The core to Star Trek ship design at the time was that you had to be able to recognize what show you were watching if you saw it through the door of another room. That was literally the rule they had internally, and that is a complex shape, but it's really recognizable from all. It's really recognizable from all angles. And so, yeah, it's absolutely one of my favorites.
That's brilliant. Okay, let's go to Ed.
I'm a child of the 70s, so my first crush would be the Imperial Star Destroyer from basically the opening scene of New Hope. It's it personifies the Empire. I mean, you see this, this shot of the little ship go whip across the screen, and then the big ship keeps coming, and it's sort of, it's going just as fast, but we haven't passed it yet. And it fits its role perfectly. It is that personification. It's, very clean lines, very much militaristic look. It fits with the sort of the overwhelming jackboot of authority of the evil empire. So that would be my first love when it comes to the starship design.
And parodied perfectly in Spaceballs.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's the fact that it's one that still sticks, that you would see even much later, things that have used, that even when you see, shall we say, the Star Destroyer laid low, it's still this kind of the Titan brought down. It still kind of feels like, oh, that's what I'm doing.
You look at Rogue One and it hasn't aged today.
Yeah, well, funnily, my first introduction to Star Wars was from a book that I found in the library called Star Wars, and I had no idea about it until then. Anyway, so let's move on to Dan. What was your first spaceship crush?
To be honest, it's the Enterprise as well. But I would have to pick the original. Well, no, actually, the D's lovely, but the D's a little bit wide in the hips. It is the original. Thank you. There's the original Enterprise. I saw, I think, Star Trek, the original series, on reruns when they were first repeated Yeah, that's the one. I'm coming to that. It's just such an extremely clever design because it managed to suggest a military warship and a gunboat and all those things, but it also has the science fiction element of having a saucer section, so it's also a flying saucer. It is such a distinct design. I love that. It made such a big impression, but it's actually that one that he's holding up there. It is the 1701A, the movie version after it's lost in Search for Spock, isn't it? That it's just such an incredible design, and I just believe it every time I see it. And the only thing to me that comes remotely close to that, and I'll mention it as an honorary runner-up, is the Eagle Transporter from Space 1999, which is a beautiful, beautiful design, and has the great added benefit of looking completely, genuinely functional. In the terms of the time, it looks like a spaceship that actually works, and it is this sort of pickup truck of Moonbase Alpha. So those are the two. I can never quite decide which.
The Eagle, of course, the Eagle's really notable for a couple of different factors. One is that it's made on a TV budget, and it actually affected Star Wars in a massive way. The reason that the first ship you see on screen in Star Wars, the Blockade Runner, is so well detailed out, because that was, for a very long time in production, the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
And then George Lucas, while in London, saw the film, saw Space 1999, and went, that looks a bit like our ship with the cone cockpit on the front. And so he calls up Joe Johnson and says, I need a new spaceship. And so it has to fit in this shape, and this set has to fit roughly inside it, but doesn't really matter. And that's why the internal set of the Falcon doesn't actually fit in any stage model. And so this part of it was originally on the front. The cockpit was originally on the front of the Blockade Runner. They moved that across, built the curved corridor. Yeah, Maggie's having a lot of fun, and that's how we get to the hamburger.
And Leeann, over to you.
I may have mentioned as a heads up during email that more of my references kind of come from video games and comics and stuff like that. But I think some of my first sort of spaceship crushes would have to be one of them is the ship from Bucky O'Hare.
Yeah.
The righteous indignation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? That's what it's called. And the second one, because it's tied into a game I absolutely love, it has to be the Highwind from Final Fantasy VII.
Mm-hmm.
Because you spent most of the game, most of the first disc, just kind of traveling around an entire globe on foot. But then after the start of disc 2, I'm not going to spoil any stories, but the stuff goes down, and characters have to bail out of this situation, and they find themselves escaping on the Highwind, which is sort of like a cross between a sort of rocket, a blimp. It's got propellers on it as well. How can I describe it? Basically, if you've ever seen a airship in any Final Fantasy game, this would be the sort of one that looks the most diesel punk. If you get me. But I don't know what else to describe it to. Another ship I love, it has to be the Queen Emeraldus from the Matsumoto verse, and it resembles a giant blimp with a galleon as a sort of main kind of living ship component underneath it. And it's basically operated by just one person, who's Emeraldus herself. And it's kind of implied that it's a living sort of sentient ship as well, that kind of picks up on what its master desires and where it needs to go. Gosh, what other ships do I like? Now there's a few from video games I could talk about, like the Vic Viper from the Gradius series, in that it sort of looks like a two-pronged tongue, kind of, that makes it look a lot interesting. And maybe the ships from the Darius series, because they resemble hawks. They're called the Silver Hawks. And every other enemy ship they fight resemble fish, including the bosses of each stage. Now, that's a whole freaking encyclopedia of descriptions there. But yeah, you could tell, like shmup games, I could talk about them all day. But anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And since you already mentioned your current spaceship crushes, let's see how the others in this panel have cheated on their first crush. So let's go to Dan on that. What is your current spaceship crush?
Well, goodness me. I still love all the. What I love is the evolution in the architecture of particular types of design. So having loved the Enterprise back in the 60s and early 70s, I love the way that the Star Trek, in each iteration of Star Trek, has used the same combinations of nacelles and saucers and main hull. So you get some wonderfully spectacular versions. Even in Discovery, there's some ships where I think that's a great reinterpretation of that classic design. And I sort of love the families. For the same reason, I've always been very, very fond of the TIE fighters in Star Wars, and I love all the different variants. So it's not so much there is a new ship that's come along, it's watching how different generations of filmmakers and special effects makers re-evolve a classic design and show you a different way of doing it that is really, really exciting and really interesting. And
James?
If I had to pick a current thing that I'm besotted with, it's definitely the one I bought two of. It's the U-wing from Rogue One is just an incredible design. Ryan, I can't remember his name. The visual designer for Star Wars did an incredible job taking parts of the X-wing, and then reformatting that for a landing craft. Because the sequel series has landing craft, the prequel series has landing craft, but the original trilogy never had a landing craft. The closest thing they had was the Executor shuttle, but with a longer body, which you see that turn up in special editions. But this was a brilliant adaptation to create a landing craft that it looks significant from underneath. It looks heavy. The camera gets blocked off on both sides when you push it on the door, but when you pull back from it, it looks dynamic and it looks huge, and you can tell what it's doing, because when it's landing, it looks like this, but when it's going into flight, it pulls back and rips off the ground like that. It's an incredibly dynamic design, and it just looks like it's at speed at rest, and you can't say better than that for a ship design.
Fantastic, and thanks for showing us these things, because it's it adds an extra dimension. But let's go to Ed. What is your current crush on the spaceship?
I waver between two designs. I love the Defiant from DS9, because it's a case of, right, this is a Federation starship where we've stripped off everything that isn't either boom or zoom. Because I have, you're a case of, I mean, I love in some respects that you get the likes of the Enterprise D, and it's a case of they must be incredibly depressing to face in a fight because you're in a Klingon ship where you don't even get a mattress, and the QE2 turns up and goes, "Come on." So, but the competition the Defiant has is the new Battlestar Galactica, because that looks like an aging prize fighter, a case of something that can take a nuke to the face, spit out a couple of teeth, and say, "Is that all you've got?" And I love in science fiction in general. Yes, I want FTL drives, I want ray guns, I want rail guns, I want all that. But I also want things to look as if there is still a place in the toolkit for a big hammer.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I just want to add that I'm currently crushing on something called the Space Battleship Yamato. And that one is just crazy because it's a Japanese battleship from World War II that has been converted into a spaceship. And it has like the wave motion gun that can basically destroy planets in some cases. It has turrets that can shoot in all directions, probably except for the ones you would want to, and a third bridge which is at the bottom of the hull, and it just keeps getting destroyed because like there's absolutely no protection. And
it's also the only bit on that side of the ship, so of course it's going to get targeted.
Of course it will. And I would like to add to that since the design of that one is quite questionable because it's a bit weird, I would like us to hear from you. What are the most questionable design decisions you've seen in this ship? Let's start with Dan.
Questionable design decisions. Again, as history goes by, you realize that some things that you thought were questionable aren't that questionable after all. Like, for instance, I for years as a kid, going back to TIE fighters, I went, how do you land a TIE fighter? There must be some kind of specialist rack, like a steam catapult on an aircraft carrier, because they've got no deployable landing gear, and surely they're not going to stand on the tips of their wings as my toy does, he said, aged 11 or whatever. Turns out they do. Who knew? That's a fantastic thing. And then just when you're going, okay, that's what they do. They are obviously a rigid structure enough they can stand on their ion engine sails, and they can stand there like that, and that's how they park them. Lo and behold, the Mandalorian comes along and shows us yet another interpretation where they fold outwards and form landing feet of themselves. And I'm going, oh no, it's like a bus that lowers at the curb. The TIE fighter sits down so you can get out of it more easily. And I thought that was fabulous. So I think even when you see a preposterous, and even the one you're talking about there, there's something spectacular about the idea of a World War II battleship in space. I think it's brilliant. Even when something is fundamentally preposterous, I always think, yes, but if you're doing your job properly, you can find a way of either explaining why it works that way, or rationalizing it into the context of the universe. And what I would recommend as an example of that is in Warhammer 40,000, the ships aren't just big; they're ridiculously big, even by the standards of the universe they come from. They are colossal, and they resemble castles. It's like somebody went, we want a spaceship, let's just build a castle and put an engine on it, and we're going to send that through space. And these things are not only made of steel and all the other fancy metals that they've got in their universe, they're also made of things like stone. Now I know that weight isn't necessarily an issue here, but mass alone, you're going, what are you doing? And actually, in a recent book where I was thinking about it, I was thinking, no, let's start, rather than just go, okay, that's just what they look like, don't worry about it. Yes, it's got a portcullis, don't look at the portcullis. Yes, its hatch is still open on chains. Don't think about that. I went, no, let's think about this rationally. You think about the idea that the coming out of the dark age of technology in the Warhammer universe, they were reconquering human space after thousands of years. They had a clearly a medieval design ethic in what they were doing. They were building ships that were also a projection of power. They were statement ships. They were going, we're going to come to your world and conquer your world, or rescue your world, whichever it comes. But we're going to bring our fortresses with us. This is a declaration. We don't even have to come to fight us. We will bring our enormous castles into orbit, and we will invite you aboard and go, look, we have got an enormous colonnade here made of stone. That's how much we care. look at it. Look at this. Our engines are so powerful. We can warp transit this across the universe, and you are now terrified of us because we're also 3 feet taller than you are. And all of that put together, you're going, that's why they look that way. At the moment you can rationalize that, it's not a poor design decision. It's part of the
aesthetic,
the fabric. Yeah, the aesthetic, the fabric of the IP itself. So that's my argument, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, and like in Voltron, you have the castle that the princess, travels in, and then the lions are just kind of flying out of it. In the new version of Voltron, anyway.
Yeah.
Oh no, in the classic version too, the castle does fly once you get to the final episode.
Ah, okay. And okay, so James, what do you think on this one? What's your most questionable design?
Oh, most questionable design. It's the Edmond probably has the same problem as me, is that a lot of things rush to my mind all at once. But we
did wonder about the smoke coming out your ears.
Yeah, it has to be though. When you look at this, right? This is the refit Enterprise from the Star Trek motion picture. It's a beautiful design, based on Matt Jeffries' design, updated by chap who would end up doing the Enterprise D, Andrew Probert. How on earth do you get to this?
Yes.
This is the J.J. Abrams Star Trek Enterprise.
The Kelvin universe.
The Kelvin universe design, yes. He wanted it to look like a hot rod, and so he made the engines much larger. He wanted it to look good in a long lens, and so the nacelles are tighter together and further up. The neck has been thickened, which honestly makes sense, because if you've ever actually done the math on the 1701, the neck width is about the size of a compact car. Like if you actually do the math, it looks like that. There's a video by Junk Paul Transmission on YouTube which goes into this in like excruciatingly. Oh God, I take a lot of things for suspension of disbelief in Star Trek, don't I? But yeah, it's also like the Kelvin Enterprise is also huge for no appreciable reason. It's factors larger than the original thing, even though it's supposed to be set at the same time with roughly the same politics, which kind of bugs me because it seemed like I wanted to have the biggest Star Trek ship ever made. That's what I'd count as the questionable design decision, because imagine if someone had sat down when they're making a new Star Wars movie and gone, yeah, but it's a bit grotty and it's a bit dull, so let's make the engines really big at the back, like it's a street racer, and we'll add stripes to it, and we'll make it all smooth, and what else? Oh yeah, let's make it 8 times larger so we can have a hangar inside of it. Like, great style over function. If you're going to engage with a property, you have it's good to know why you're engaged, why people engage with that property too, and serve up not what people want, but what people understand to be valuable already.
Mm-hmm. And Leeann? Leeann, can you hear me? You're muted. Okay, let's go over to...
No, I'm unmuted now. Sorry, it was only took a split second. I beg your pardon, because I was doing stuff here. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, I know, technical difficulty. I am a technical difficulty. Anyway, I'll talk about this terrible robot as a questionable ship design. I know that the shows like Voltron and Power Rangers are like, the bread and butter of everyone's childhood and fandom in general. But I don't see, my kind of issue with the shows is that when you have the individual parts that make up the giant fighting robot, is that they're kind of ineffective by themselves, in that, you have at least 5 pilots and they're color themed and they're associated with an animal. Exactly, James, thank you. But it's like, kind of operate sort of independently of the complete robot if things kind of hit the fan. So I doubt Voltron and Power Rangers are like, the biggest sort of worst examples. Thank you, James. We see the Voltron line. Thank you, green line. but I just remember this anime I picked up on a DVD for €1.50 or something like years ago in Drogheda. The shop doesn't exist anymore. It's called Magnus the Robot, and it's sort of this lame, very lame anime with some brain melting moments like karate chopping a bull in the head to kind of prove your skill and sort of fighting prowess. But the robot itself is really sort of uninspired 70s style schlock coming out from Japan, and it has 2 pilots, and of course it's made up of 2 separate robots that combine to make this, this much bigger robot called Magnus. It was called Robogakin in Japan, by the way, but I can't barely tell you any more of the story because the DVD I got was one of those 90 episode shows cut down into a 1 hour, 30-minute movie sort of edition. So you get characters that briefly appear and then disappear, or otherwise contribute nothing to the overall plot. I'm kind of doing air quotes here. But the transformation sequence can only be described as a weird sort of Kama Sutra between the 2 pilots. Because, they sit normally in their own robot, so when they transform, the main guy pilot is kind of almost riding her, the female pilot, like a motorbike or something. I don't know. I can't even describe it. Like, I don't know how they got this released on DVD in such a hacked up form, but I'll put the name down in the Discord or something like that, because you need to kind of look up the transformation sequence for this bloody thing. I swear to God, it's just,
that design lineage survives to today with Darling in the Franxx, which has a pilot reclining in a chair and they're not called pilots. There's some other name, and it's definitely derogatory, and I can't remember what it is. But there's a female control system, which is leaning forward, and they have handles on their hips, and so they sit there. Yeah,
probably.
And it's like anime. You're not doing yourself any favors here.
Isn't that show funded by a cult or something?
I don't know. Probably best not to cast aspersions unless we know for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think that's what the internet was saying about it. But
must be correct.
Possibly.
well,
Yeah.
there must be a lineage then between Magnus the Robot and freaking Franxx. The weird sort of positions they take in the
and the psychosexual nature of Evangelion gets in the middle of it somehow.
So Ed, tell us about your most questionable design.
Well, I considered the low-hanging fruit, which is the bridge on various ships in various properties being essentially on the edge, essentially on the outer surface, and sometimes with windows. As the whole Star Trek, we will put non-combatants into what are functionally our warships. But I ultimately had to go to a story I read when I was a child, now only vaguely remember, where this spaceship, due to the ship's cat eating basically a computer chip, due to circumstances, became the weapons control system for the ship. There's the point where the guns stop working, and they go, "Why are the guns not working?" Tiddles has done her business. Right, find the chip, wash it, wrap it in bacon, and for the love of God, reinstall it.
Oh my God, that's an episode of Next Generation I would pay to see, where they've got to dig around in the litter for the isolinear chip. That's
that'll be a Lower Decks plot in like 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Because for anyone who hasn't seen it, the Doctor in the Lower Decks is a cat.
Yeah, for the life of me, I cannot give you the name of that because that is literally almost the only bit of that story I remember. But yeah.
Well, that's a challenge for the chat if I ever heard one. Go, chat. Go, you magnificent nerds. Give us this information.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just go to different media, because here we have panelists who have worked in loads of different media, from books to comics to film, gaming, anime, anything in between. So what difference does the medium make to the way we perceive and interact with the spaceship? Like the immersion in the story, or firing up our imagination or anything else. And I think, James, you've already demonstrated some of that by showing us the spaceship. So do you want to start?
Well, in terms of the how the medium affects it, well, from TV going from 4:3 to widescreen is an obvious change. It's why the Enterprise A is designed differently than the original Enterprise. Enterprise has a very big vertical presence, but the A stretches things out, and of course, the further you get into Star Trek, the longer and thinner and more widescreen the ships get. Sorry, the question was.
As in, for example, from between a book, a TV, or a video game.
The internal walking around space of a ship is a thing I think about a lot, because it wasn't a thing that would always be wired up. Some ships we genuinely don't know what the internal space of them are. For instance, there's a small ship that they use as a troop lander in the first of the Star Wars sequels, that then becomes a shuttlecraft in the second of the Star Wars sequels, and it has a massive internal to it, where in the first one they'd released cutaways and they released internal drawings of it, where it's just a cockpit, and now it's a cockpit and a rear section, and you can walk around and have a scene in it because the story demanded that. And so a lot of things do actually shift and shape in size. For instance, like the internal, because of the swapping nature of the first Millennium Falcon set, the internal of the Millennium Falcon never at any point fit inside of the external. And anyone tells you otherwise is lying, because you can look at the blueprints document and you can lie one across the other, and I have, and it doesn't.
Could I jump in that I was reading, this is the Real World now, that was a designer of actual warships, and he mentioned that along the way he picked up on a project that was, work in progress, and he pulled everything together, and he realized at that stage 2 of the ship's engines were located outside of the hull.
Dan?
To me, when you're either working on a spaceship or indeed in trying to invent or inspire a spaceship, no matter what you're doing, it's always got to play to the strengths of the medium you're working in. So in comics they tend to be very much style over substance, because we're not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on how they work or why they work. They just do, particularly in superhero universes. Where in a movie, quite often we need to, or a TV show, we need to rationalize it, as you say, rationalize the interior to make sure that we understand how it works, because that's where we're going to spend most of our time. It's just got to look cool on the outside. And in novels, you'd be surprised at how much time I spend trying to make sure that there is some rigor to the design of spaceships that I'm only describing in prose because they happen to be where the scene is happening. And to me, the one thing that connects those things all together is a sense of credibility, that you believe that they are what they are supposed to be, and that they are solid and they are very real. And I think some things achieve that very, very well indeed. I mentioned working on Alien Isolation earlier on, but that's because I think that although it's very, very lo-fi tech in the Alien movie, I really believe the Nostromo interior, and working on a game where we try to recreate that so convincingly that it was a functional utilitarian working space was something that I found very, very interesting. And when they build structures for movies, quite often they are it convinces you how real they are. Now, the Milano in Guardians of the Galaxy, which is on 2 shelves visible on these screens at the moment, I actually got the chance to walk around on board the Milano. In the comic, it was they just had various different ships. It wasn't ever crystallized in the same sort of way, but they got Chris Foss in to design and bring the color to the ships in Guardians. And I was lucky enough to get a set visit, and James Gunn took me on set where they were filming in the Milano, and they had built the whole thing as a complete thing. It was a complete thing. You could get into it, you could walk around. So all the interiors were filmed inside, all the exteriors were, and they had it up on a gimbal mount, and they were moving it around with them in it whilst they filmed these things. And then they could disassemble it to get cutaway shots inside. And to walk around on a ship that I had essentially vaguely imagined, and to see it as a real thing that wasn't just a set, it was the whole thing in and out, was a really bizarre experience. But it made me think much more when I was writing then, comics and novels, also about how credible I wanted to be. When somebody's reading a book, I want them to believe that they can they can sit down, they can reach out and touch things, that it has that credibility to it.
Fantastic. And Leeann?
What was the theme of the original question again? Sorry, sorry.
Okay, so how does the medium, like say anima versus books, how does it affect? How is the medium the message when it comes to spaceships?
I think it just depends if you rely on, say, live action descriptions or books or anime and stuff like that. I think from my experience from the medium of anime, like that's kind of like the home of many iconic ships. That also includes Transformers, which people see as a mostly sort of American made series, but all the designers and animators at the time were from Japan.
Interesting, the senior designer wasn't actually from Japan. He was Peter Chung, but he is Japanese.
Yeah.
So he went on to do Rugrats and so forth, and many other short films of his own.
But it's fun. It's funny because a lot of I think in anime, like a lot of attention to detail is paid towards like the interior of the ship as well as the exterior, like of the cockpit or any other engines and how it's propelled, and then of course the design from the outside. Like I would read a series called 5-Star Stories, which is basically a sort of mecha series, giant mecha series, but the designs of the robots are so bizarre in the fact that they take cues from fashion models as opposed to blocky sort of machines of war. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, you should definitely look up the guy's work. He is nuts. He animated his own movie that got released in 2012, but hasn't been out on Blu-ray yet or anything. But if you look at those designs, like he's got entire volumes of books describing these individual robots, what nation or planet they're affiliated with, how they operate, who their pilot is, who their pilot assistant, known as a Fatima, is. It's more like a very advanced biocomputer that looks like a female, again, more kind of eye candy for the series. But there is so much kind of going on. Like, I think only in manga could the creator really sort of go all out with designing and describing his creations. Because when it comes down to it, like if you see stuff in Western media, you get stuff like the Star Wars encyclopedia and stuff like that, and you see iterations of it come out every decade or so, depending what movies come out. That kind of just implies that Star Wars is still unfinished. There's a lot of kind of stories going on, like say the Mandalorian, there's Rogue One, there's loads of other ships kind of coming in there. But I think because it's only just Star Wars and not any other really series, unless you start digging out of print books about other TV shows and stuff like that, it just seems to be a massive focus on just Star Trek or Star Wars in terms of ship designs, which kind of implies that there's only so much you can only put in a book, which is ridiculous. I don't know how to describe it.
I wrote an entire little book on ships.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
But there's like so much to kind of talk about. Like, I feel that, like, for example, for 5-Star Stories and of course Gothic Maid or anything else the creators refused to kind of release to the public, kind of works best in sort of a illustrated book medium. And it's just like, there you go. Like I was talking about sort of tangible reading material yesterday in another panel, but I think it's because you can actually sort of read it in today's sort of print and paper technology. It's kind of a nice contrast to the absolute far distant future technology mentioned in these ships. So, but just in particular, I like how 5-Star Stories ones are done, because the writer has a bit of a sense of humor, like a really warped sense of humor about his characters and stuff. But it's also alongside some really excellent drawings and details and stuff he puts into his mechas and his ships and everything. It's insane. Anyway, sorry for waffling.
Thanks so much.
Can I hop in there actually? Because there's two things I feel remiss if I didn't mention. One is when it comes to spaceship design in comics, so much you find is from a fan's perspective anyway. So much you find is just about what gets me to the end of this page. So, for instance, if you look up the Shi'ar Empire's first appearance in X-Men, they're on the bridge of the Enterprise. It's very clearly the bridge of the Enterprise. On the other end of that spectrum is Brian Hitch's work on the Authority, which is a beautiful set of consistent locations, which are just magnificently designed. They're sumptuous, and they return again and again and again and look consistent and beautiful every time, which is what led him to be one of the look dev designers for Doctor Who when it came back in 2005. I was asking him about what other work he'd done at the launch of one of the Ultimates books, and he mentioned that he very conspiratorially leaned in and said, "Yes, Doctor Who. So I designed this beautiful thing, and they've changed the look of it, but it's still it's 3 stories tall. It looks magnificent, and when the Time Rotor goes up and down, it makes the noise." I think that just shows you that if this stuff touches you in a place in your brain that you can't entirely guard against, that you can't be a serious person about it because the enthusiasm will just overwhelm you. The other thing, and I'm sorry for going on a little bit, is I'd be very remiss if I didn't mention a thing called the Orville Interactive Fan Experience, which is free to download. It's on Steam right now. If you want to see what it looks like when fans get ownership of a thing they're a fan of, Messy Desk Interactive were originally working on an Enterprise E walk around project in Unity, where you could walk every deck, you could hit the buttons, you could change the status of things. They were shut down really hard, unnecessarily painfully hard by Viacom. And they have since moved over to the Orville. They've gotten permissions, and it's this magnificent thing where you can actually walk through every deck of the ship. You can get a real sense for what it is to be inside that space and see what it's like when that space goes on and on and on. So it's not just you run around the corner and then the cameras have to be set up again on the other side of the corner and you run backwards over the same set. The set just keeps going and going and going. And if anybody who's interested in exploring ships, I very much encourage downloading that and having a look at it, because contiguous ships that you live on board, the experience of that is such an unusual thing now, where we tend to get ships like the Firefly. We get all new versions of the Millennium Falcon, which ultimately are Winnebagos. There's a seat over here and the rest of it's what we live in. But a sense of a real grand, powerful ship with a large crew is something that's a little lost to us because we're so far away from the naval tradition.
James, I have to stop you there, I'm afraid, because I would love to chat with you for another hour or two, but we are already 5 minutes overrun on the panel. So I'll just very, very quickly, I will just very, very quickly thank you, James Brophy, and Edmond Barrett, Dan Abnett, and Leeann Hamilton. And I'm so sorry I didn't manage to ask any questions from the audience, or indeed a whole bunch of questions that I still have here on my list. So we can continue the discussion on the panel's channel on Discord, which is Iconic Spaceships. And thank you so much, the audience, and thank you to our producer Maggie for for this amazing panel, and goodbye, everyone.
Very good. See you again. See you on Discord.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.